Hello, I'm Basil Valentine, and this is Unprecedented TV, unfiltered, uncensored, unprecedented, the home of free speech here on the internet. Do please like and subscribe over at YouTube. Follow us on X, and remember, I'm on air every day, Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. for Ascending Order, your daily news edit, with live guests and all the genuinely most important stories from around the world. Don't allow yourself to be propagandized by the corporate media. Forget the world at one on Radio 4. Join me, Basil Valentine, instead, 1 p.m. on X, Monday to Friday, also on YouTube. And I'll see you all very soon. And I'm pleased to say I'm seeing more and more of you by the day. I do hope you appreciate our alternative take on the day's events here. We don't kowtow to politicians. We call them out for what they are, which in most cases is self-serving narcissists who've never had a real job in their lives. A prime example, of course, has been pontificating this morning in Birmingham. I'm talking about the abysmal Kemi Badenoch. My goodness. You won't find me dissecting her speech in detail here. I think it's completely irrelevant. She's never going to become Prime Minister. I certainly hope not. In fact, I hope she doesn't last much longer as leader of the Conservative Party. A truly dreadful woman, rather spiteful as well when asked about the genocide in Gaza on a Sunday morning program a few weeks ago. She couldn't actually bring herself to empathize with the mass slaughter of Palestinians at all, and instead just kept bleating out the usual nonsense. The Zionist talking points into which she's been inculcated. I wonder where these people get their brainwashing from, quite frankly. The Conservative Party, for example, is supposed to be the Church of England party. Isn't it supposed to believe in Jesus Christ? What part of Israel's genocide in Gaza would Jesus Christ support? All answers on a postcard, please. Anyway, today is Wednesday, the 8th of October, 2025, and La Belle France is completely engulfed in a political and constitutional crisis that threatens to bring down the government. In fact, the government has, to a large extent, already fallen. Prime Minister Le Cornu forced to tender his resignation. It's all over the question of the budget. France enjoys one of the highest living standards in the world on any given metric. And when you factor in the quality of infrastructure in France, I've had the pleasure of traveling on French trains a couple of times over the last few years. They're an absolute delight. We all know that the cuisine is the best in the world. They also have some of the most beautiful cities and countryside. So quite apart from income metrics and things like that, France remains, I think, the crown jewel of Europe and therefore the world in terms of its culture and refinement. There's a reason why the French are so arrogant. It's because they have the best of everything. Well, the government may fall. Macron, of course, is engulfed in scandal left, right and centre. And I'm going to be joined in the second half of the programme by the distinguished academic based in France, Dr. John Laughland. We're going to talk about whether Macron can survive this, because there are widespread calls for his resignation. He is blamed by more people for this crisis than anyone else, and he may have to go. Otherwise, if they can't solve the budget crisis tonight, then it looks like there will be another general election, with France, like so many other parts of Europe, roughly equally divided between left and right, with both Marine's National Rally Party, Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party, and Monsieur Mélenchon's La France Insoumise, France Unbowed, gaining in the polls at the expense of the centrist parties. So I'm looking forward to talking to Dr. John Laughland about that, and also, of course, the possibility, I can hardly believe myself saying these words, of World War III. The Ukrainians are taking delivery of Tomahawk missiles, which they are happily incapable of firing, because these things have a range of 1,500 miles, and from deep within Ukrainian territory could therefore strike Moscow. And that means we could well be in World War III. So we'll have a look at the situation on the Eastern Front, which doesn't seem to be improving anytime soon. We're also, of course, going to take our daily look at the civil liberties situation in Britain, which is becoming ever more precarious. A man was arrested in London last night for holding up a magazine cover, and the rhetoric around anti-genocide protests is becoming increasingly hysterical. But first to the genocide itself, as is often the case, when there is the possibility of a ceasefire, Israel ramps up the killing immediately beforehand. But nevertheless, the chances of a ceasefire are probably better now than they have been for many, many months. Whether or not Donald Trump is applying the required amount of pressure remains to be seen. Of course, we had Netanyahu speaking earlier this week in typically mendacious fashion, should I say, that Iran is building intercontinental ballistic missiles that could reach Mar-a-Lago and New York. Absolutely insane stuff. But when his own future is threatened, he likes to find a neighboring country to blame and start a war so that he can stay out of jail. Really, it is as bizarre and sinister as that. Anyway, first let's go to Al Jazeera for an update on where we are with the possibility of the ceasefire as of 12 noon today in London.
We're going to bring in now Sami Al-Arian. He's a professor of public affairs and director at the Centre for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zayem University. Sami, talk me through the nitty-gritty. What we're hearing from these talks already is that Hamas want some reassurance from international countries or wider groups that there will be some repercussions if Israel does not stick to even these withdrawal lines that we're talking about. They want some reassurance that there will be repercussions should the deal not proceed to the next step. Is that viable?
That's correct. I mean, we have two irreconcilable positions here. On one hand, the Israelis want the release of the captives without really committing to much. But the ending of the war is a new variable here that Trump is trying to insist on. Whether he sticks to it or not is the really big question. On the other hand, the resistance and much of the world want to stop this war, to end this genocide. At the same time, they're willing, obviously, to release the captives, provided that they have an exchange of prisoners. Now, 4 of the 5 conditions that the resistance has set previously in all the different negotiations are being met in this particular Trump deal, Trump plan. The only problem here is the withdrawal. Now, if Israel does not withdraw to a position where it evacuates the population centers, then there will be a problem for the people in the south going back to their houses and places in the north.
So which line, practically, for our viewers, would we be talking about there? Which line is the... Well, there is a red line there, but which line would the withdrawal be?
The problem is the Israelis want only to withdraw to the blue line when all the hostages or all the captives are released. That does not give you much guarantee what happens afterwards. As you could see, that splits Gaza into 2 positions. And
it's
they
a significant portion that's on the other
huge.
side of that.
I mean, it's less than 20% of Gaza. So that is unacceptable, completely unacceptable. And unless the Trump administration, the American delegation, presses the Israelis to withdraw to the positions that they agreed on in previous negotiations, it's going to be very difficult for this to pull through.
So my question then is, you're talking about the United States putting that pressure on. Is it reasonable to expect that other international communities should also put some pressure on Israel?
I mean, the international community has been saying all along in different forums, Security Council, General Assembly, International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, all of them have been calling this a genocide that must stop. The problem has always been the complicitous United States. Now we have new positions, purportedly by Trump, in which he is arguing that this war must stop and that all hostages must be released. But he's putting vague terms. Even the stuff that he promised the Arab and Muslim leaders before he met Netanyahu have been changed to Israeli positions. These are unacceptable terms, but that's what the negotiations now are trying to resolve.
You've talked previously saying that this plan is full of traps.
Yes.
Is that one of those points that you talk about being full of traps?
Absolutely, but it's even more than that. I mean, this plan has two things. First, you have the thing about the things that Hamas can negotiate about. And that's basically what the Hamas statement said. We can negotiate on the end of the war, on the release of hostages, on the aid, on the withdrawal and the reconstruction. Other than that, what happens to the future of Gaza, we don't have a mandate to negotiate. And therefore, this has to go back to the whole Palestinian factions and people to decide on. But Trump wanted to press the Palestinians, Hamas in particular, to commit to certain positions where they have no mandate to do so.
Let's pick up on that, because that is one of the points, is what is the future governance here? And there has been quite a bit of involvement, even from the beginning. The announcement of this plan was not Donald Trump has talked to Hamas, but it was Donald Trump has talked to other Middle Eastern nations who have all joined together. They've put pen to paper here, but they will have some competing interests here. How much of those competing interests will play a role in where these talks go?
That's a problem. It's, again, a new colonial mentality that's trying to dictate to the Palestinians their future. They're trying to remove completely Palestinian agency. Over 100 years ago, that's what the British mandate was all about, with Herbert Samuel being in charge of Palestine for the next 30 years. Now they want to bring Tony Blair, another war criminal, trying to do so. But the Palestinians will not accept it. But Hamas saying, we're not going to accept it, but that's not our decision to make. That should be for the whole Palestinian people, and therefore they would refuse even to negotiate these parts.
For which there is no option for them to negotiate on yet. Sami El-Arian, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That is Sami El-Arian, who is the Professor of Public Affairs and Director at the Centre of Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul's Zayam University.
Don't miss out.
Now, let's just remind ourselves what's actually happened and happening in Gaza. We're not afraid to do so on this program, even if the corporate media refuse to show you the scale of the devastation. That is a graphic illustrating before and after. The line moving across the screen from left to right indicates the extent to which northern Gaza, as you can see, has been completely and utterly obliterated. Here is some of the refugee tents. The fires caused by further bombs raining down on their heads. And I'm not crazy about the music either, but the scale of the destruction is hard to deny. Now, here in the UK, of course, if you don't like the genocide, then you are increasingly in the crosshairs of not only this government, but also the opposition. But yesterday in Edinburgh, I'm pleased to say, amongst other places, there were protests at the 2 years of the genocide. And this one student made a particularly poignant remark.
Today marks 2 years of genocide in which tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed. And if people fail to see that, then they fail to see the Palestinians as human.
Indeed. Professor Nick Maynard is one of the surgeons from the UK that has recently returned from Gaza. I'm surprised he gets platformed in the corporate media because he's a truth teller, and they like to try and keep the truth from the British public so that we can be propagandized instead. But he did manage to get some well-judged points out on Sky News recently.
Let's just begin by your reflections on what you saw working in Gaza.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for asking me on. This is a very sad day. We must remember, of course, the tragic, appalling events of October the 7th, but we must also remember what's been happening since then. And I have been out to Gaza on 3 separate occasions over the last 2 years, and most recently returned at the end of July from a spell at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, and I bore witness with my own eyes the appalling humanitarian catastrophe, the genocide that's been carried out, and each time I've been to Gaza, it's worse than it was the time before. And I am encouraged by the peace talk, the negotiations that are going on, and just hope, we all hope and implore that there's a ceasefire as soon as possible.
Now, you say it worsened over the time that you had gone, the 3 different occasions you had gone. Describe for us how it had gotten worse. I mean, was it a lack, an increasing lack of equipment, being able to do your job properly? Was it an increasing ferocity of the fighting? How did it?
It's a mixture of things. I mean, the traumas we saw, the killings of civilians, the appalling injuries from explosive injuries from the bombs, increasingly gunfire and gunshot wounds in young people, the huge numbers of small children I saw who'd been killed and critically injured, and women and men, of course. So the injuries were getting worse each time I was there. But of course, the lack of resources to treat these patients was getting worse. So we were operating, trying to provide surgical and medical care under the most appalling conditions. And I think the other thing that got inestimably worse over the 2 years has been the malnutrition and the profound effect of the blockade of food and aid going in, the profound effect of the malnutrition on the people there and the ability for them to survive the injuries they were receiving.
Now, of course, one of the key points about genocide, something not talked about much by Western politicians, is the statement of intent. But within Israel, they're very clear about what they want to do, as we can hear now.
Every child in Gaza is the enemy, and not a single Gazan child should remain there. We need to conquer Gaza and settle it.
I mean, you want to file all of this under the Nazification of Israel. That's where it should be filed. This is a country that's gone completely off the rails. And the more that you see it in operation, the more it looks like the Germans under Hitler. This is just hard to believe. We're talking about eradicating all of the Palestinians in Gaza, murdering them. This is hard to believe.
I just think we need to kill them, every one of them, and that's it.
You need to destroy their offspring to prevent them from creating more offspring.
This is the sort of things that the Germans did. It's supposed to be never again. I don't see any evidence that people in Israel believe in the principle of never again, certainly when it applies to the Palestinians.
Here in the West, in the United Kingdom in particular, of course, you'll never see cameras and microphones pointed at ordinary Israelis so they can state their genocidal intent. Instead, Israel is invariably portrayed as the victim. John Mearsheimer, who you saw there, is an American academic and one of the most astute commentators on the Middle East. He spoke to Judge Andrew Napolitano yesterday on judging freedom and gave a summary of the 2-year anniversary of the genocide.
It's quite clear that on October 7th, a good number, we don't know what the number is, but a good number of the Israelis who were killed were not killed by Hamas, they were killed by the IDF. And I find that hardly surprising, given the nature of the fight that was taking place. It is hard to discriminate in those situations. Now, the Hannibal Doctrine is a very different matter. The argument there, or the claim there, is that what the Israelis do is that if it looks like an Israeli soldier or even an Israeli citizen is going to be captured by Hamas or some other terrorist group, to use the Israelis' language to describe those groups, then the IDF will kill those Israelis so that they don't become hostages. And the logic here is that Israelis have such a high regard for human life that if hostages are captured, it will be almost impossible for Israel not to pay an enormous price to get those hostages back. So it's better to surreptitiously kill them, better for the IDF to surreptitiously kill them rather than have them become hostages. And there is a great deal of evidence that there is this Hannibal doctrine in practice inside of Israel.
That's murder.
I guess you could call it that.
Okay. Murder is something that the Israelis have never been afraid of. They are quite willing to murder people at long distance as well. It seems almost forgotten now, the pager attack in Lebanon, where devices exploded in the hands and faces of children who had nothing whatsoever to do with Hezbollah. It was undoubtedly a terrorist act, but why wasn't Israel therefore designated a terrorist nation thereafter? That particular outrage is neatly summarized in this report.
Ever since that pager attack, Manar, everybody knows that their phones can turn into bombs if Israel chooses to. And then Benjamin Netanyahu goes in the podiums of the United Nations and the United States of America and says, you are holding a piece of Israel in your hand, designating the phones. What tells me that right now when I'm speaking to you, if Israel wants to, my phone wouldn't explode and kill me? Or your phone that you put next to your bed every night would not turn into a bomb? Who stopped Israel when they did that? No one. Who can ensure us and who can be trusted to tell us that Israel doesn't have the ability to do that today and tomorrow using the AI that is provided by the technological warfare in the American deep state? Who can tell us today for sure that this cannot be used in the future against anyone, anywhere? No one. So it's not an attack on Lebanese people or on Hezbollah. It is actual empowerment of a rogue ethnic apartheid state to actually kill anyone, anytime, using anything. This is a new era in terms of savagery. And what I can't understand is that there are people who go out unapologetically parading that. You are holding a phone. You are holding a piece of communication or technology in your house around your children. Are you saying it is okay for anyone or your enemy to use it to attack anywhere? I mean, we are talking about the Americans that used to question Avril Haines when the Biden administration came in. I remember that. They used to question and interrogate people who are going to hold positions in the CIA and so on because of their massacres while fighting Qaeda. They used to say, well, you attacked bin Laden and there were children in the other room. They used to stop and ask if that was a crime of war, and they used to try internally Americans who were in positions that maybe killed people while killing Al-Qaeda. But this is the same America that is now parading a criminal tried and judged by the ICJ. They're receiving a golden pager by a person who killed or tried to kill 6,000 people at once without knowing their names, their histories. This is unfathomable, Manar. Because we're not only the ones attacked. This is attacking human technology. So it is attacking everybody in the world.
Donald Trump himself is apparently afraid of Benjamin Netanyahu, and who can blame him? On one of his many visits to Washington earlier this year, Netanyahu presented Trump with a golden pager. And in typical gangsterish fashion, I can't help thinking that that is some kind of warning. Yes, we can reach you too if we want to, Donald. So remember who is in charge. We're going to take a look later in the week, tomorrow, in fact, at the Charlie Kirk assassination once again. Candace Owens has been doing some extraordinary work revealing the text message thread she shared with Charlie, where he was apparently going to finally wake up and realize that the Zionist death cult is incompatible with the Christian faith he espoused. But he didn't get a chance, did he? His death was particularly timely. Now, a Jewish activist who was in the flotilla recently intercepted in international waters in yet another war crime by the Zionist entity. David Adler, he returned recently. I saw Ty Hickey, I'm pleased to say, online. Some of you may remember I interviewed him at the beginning of the week before he was abducted on the high seas. He's back in Ireland now, and we'll be hearing from him very soon. But I fear for my good friend, Dr. Frank Romano. Ty referenced a man in his 70s who was being tortured by the Israelis and has now been in detention for a week. It may well be Frank, because, of course, it's his second visit to an Israeli dungeon this year, so he may be singled out for special treatment. Lots of reports of mistreatment, of course, by those released. The dungeons are pretty hellish. And here's what David Adler had to say on his release.
What happened when you guys were taken and captured? Where were you taken? What were the conditions like? How were they treating you?
In Ashdod port, we were frog marched out, heads down, knees on our knees, and for basically a giant photo op for Ben-Gvir. As one of the few Jews on the mission, they found me, asked me if I was Jewish, ripped me by the ear, threw me in front of the Israeli flag to sit away from the whole group that was sat, hundreds of us, on our knees and heads down, for Ben-Gvir to show up and come yell at us in our face that we're terrorists. And so we were treated. So from that moment, we were strip searched and zip tied and blindfolded and sent to this detention camp without any kind of process. We were basically not allowed to speak to lawyers. Most people didn't speak to lawyers and would not speak to lawyers. We still haven't spoken to lawyers the whole time. We were disappeared into the Negev desert for 3 days without any confirmation from the US government that we were even alive. I don't like, speaking as a Jew, but like it bears repeating, the anti-Semitism that we endured at the hands of the state of Israel was so wild. Like it was, it's so important that we change the narrative on the idea that the state of Israel is some kind of, birthright or land for diasporic Jews to come home to. We were treated like, obviously Palestinians are considered to be the most dangerous thing that they need to either deny or destroy. But an unfaithful Jew to this Netanyahu government is considered to be like, so threatening to them that we were given this special interrogation by Ben-Gvir and the other Jew that was with me in the cells, who was suffering from severe medication withdrawals, who was begging day in and day out for a medic, was denied the most basic access to that medic. I don't want to name him without him being able to name himself, but begging. I mean, you could hear his cries every single morning, day and night. You could hear his suffering, and they basically, the guards of this facility just said, in your dreams, we'll be with you.
There you go. Here in the United Kingdom, the entire establishment is turning reality on its head. It has actually become deeply anti-Semitic itself by conflating all Jewish people with the state of Israel and all opponents of genocide as anti-Semitic. Yes, that's the kind of knot you tie yourself in. A particularly egregious example is James, so-called Cleverly. He's anything but. He's another of these that simply regurgitate talking points. But here's what he had to say about the protests, which it seems Starmer and his gang, in cahoots with the rest of the establishment, are determined to stamp out. You've either got to love genocide or shut up, according to Cleverly.
I cannot understand the motivation for protests of this type so regularly the tone has become increasingly distasteful. The timing has been distasteful. We're seeing superficially pro-Palestinian protests mutate into clearly anti-Jewish protests.
He's got no evidence for any of those claims. There's no mutation into anti-Jewish protests. As you saw there, the last side was the Jewish bloc for Palestine. But there is some hope on the horizon. Matt Kennard has pointed out that the source very close to the leadership of MI6 has been in contact, and they want to make public the opposition within the intelligence agency to the prescription of Palestine action. Senior figures said to feel it's a distraction from the battle against real terrorist threat and should never have happened. That source has been verified. Okay, in a moment, I'm going to be joined by Dr. John Laughland, and we're going to do a pivot to the European theatre. Will Macron survive? See you all in a moment. Hello, I'm Basil Valentine, and this is Unprecedented TV, unfiltered, uncensored, unprecedented, the home of free speech here on the internet. Do please like and subscribe over at YouTube. Follow us on X, and remember, I'm on air every day, Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. for Ascending Order, your daily news edit, with live guests and all the genuinely most important stories from around the world. Don't allow yourself to be propagandized by the corporate media. Forget the world at one on Radio 4. Join me, Basil Valentine, instead, 1 p.m. on X, Monday to Friday, also on YouTube. And I'll see you all very soon. And welcome back to the programme, where I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Dr. John Laughland from France. Great to see you again, John.
Hi, Basil.
And before we go on, just a quick clip from France 24, which brings us fully up to date with the political crisis engulfing the French government.
Il y a une volonté d'avoir pour la France un budget avant le 31 décembre de cette année. Et cette volonté crée un mouvement et une convergence évidemment qui éloigne les perspectives de dissolution.
Pour sortir des blocages et permettre le fonctionnement démocratique, c'est-à-dire nous levions à cet instant pour rendre hommage.
Il se trouve que les membres du gouvernement, lorsqu'ils quittent leurs fonctions, ont le droit à 3 mois d'indemnité lorsqu'ils n'ont pas de revenus par ailleurs. Il est évident que les ministres qui auront été ministres seulement quelques heures n'auront pas le droit à ces indemnités. J'ai décidé de les suspendre.
The French government, does it even exist at this point in time? Monsieur Lecornu, there was a Macron appointment, but he's failed to muster the required support in Parliament. Marine Le Pen is calling for a general election. Is that the only solution? Because at the moment, it seems nobody has enough popular support to carry any kind of majority.
Yeah, I think it probably is. I mean, also, of course, the resignation of Macron might unblock things, would unblock things, I think. But the situation is very, very severe because the deadlock in Parliament reflects the deadlock in the country. You have the centre ground, which has been in power now for, well, since 2017 under Macron, but in a way for many decades, actually, because France has been governed from the centre, really, I would say, since 1974, which is nearly 50 years ago. So that's giving way. Within the electorate, I mean, not just in Parliament. And instead, you have the famous Rassemblement National that everyone knows, led by Marine Le Pen, which is the sort of anti-immigrant populist party. But on the left, perhaps slightly less well known in Britain, is the France Unbowed, La France Insoumise, run by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, which is the, if you like, the hard left as opposed to the hard right. So I suppose, on balance, if there was an election, probably the Rassemblement National would come out victorious. But for decades, again, the other conservative parties, particularly the centrist Conservative Party, the Republicans, have, of course, refused to have anything to do with the Rassemblement National. That might be cracking now. It might be cracking. But to be honest with you, today's Wednesday, the 8th of October, it's 2:35 in France. There's no light at the end of the tunnel right now. There's speculation. There's no light at the... You just played Sébastien Lecornu, the Prime Minister, saying he thinks there's a solution to find an agreement on the budget and at least get through a few months before an election or whatever. That's not true. Earlier this morning, the former Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne suggested that France abandon its pension reforms, which were pushed through with great difficulty a few years ago by Macron and by her. And there she is now saying they should be abandoned. Well, there's no consensus about that at all. On the contrary, the centre-right is virulently opposed to it. So the idea, Lecornu's claim that there might be some agreement on the budget, I'm not really sure that that's even true either.
Here we've got a slide. It's in French, but it's perfectly comprehensive. Qui est responsable de la situation politique? Who's responsible for the political situation? 47% say Emmanuel Macron, 37% say all of them, all the politicians, with only tiny numbers there of the blame being apportioned to the other individual parties. I think for the 3% for the National Rally only. So it's Macron with almost half the population blaming him. But he isn't directly responsible for the outcome of the general election, which produced the hung parliament effectively, is he? So why does he take...
No, he is actually. I mean, he's responsible for the election. Of course, he's not responsible for the outcome, except indirectly, in the sense that, as I said a moment ago, his centre ground collapsed and thereby, if you like, opened up space for the two extremes. But he is responsible because back in July last year, 2024, it was not necessary to call an early election. The parliament still had a year or two to run. So he is directly responsible. That's why 47% of the people in the polls say he is responsible. And he did it for a particularly cynical and frankly stupid reason, which was to put spokes in the wheels of the Rassemblement National, who had just won the European elections. That was his response to them winning the European elections. In other words, he did it simply to sabotage the momentum that they had gained by winning the European elections. You know, it's true that, of course, he prevented, obviously, they weren't going to take power anyway, because they in the previous parliament, they didn't have as many seats as they do now. But he is responsible for the situation. And he is responsible as well for the fact that the blockage, the stalemate, whatever you call it, has been dragging on now for a year, because the elections were in July. Then it was the Olympics, and he used that as a pretext to delay appointing a prime minister. He appointed Michel Barnier, if I remember correctly, at the end of September, nearly 3 months after the elections, at least 2 months after the elections. Barnier fell after a couple of months. Then he put another retread in. And now, of course, a third retread. All of this has just dragged out the stalemate even further. So that's why people could blame him for it.
Those elections, of course, the National Rally did particularly well in the first round and seemed on course for victory the following week, only for then the traditional centre-right Conservative Party, sort of Christian Democrat Party, the equivalent of the Conservative perhaps in Britain, and the old centrist parties to say, no, we can't have this. And a lot of people suspect some sort of dodgy dealings went on to prevent the National Rally gaining anything like as many seats in the final outcome as was predicted, because it looked at one point after the first round of voting as if Macron would have no alternative but to appoint Marine Le Pen as Prime Minister.
Yeah, it's not dodgy dealings. It's a very simple thing. There's nothing dodgy about it. France has an electoral system which is the same as Britain, except that there are 2 rounds. And if no candidate wins in a certain constituency in the first round, no candidate gets more than 50%, then you go through to a second round a fortnight later. And in between the 2 rounds last year, it wasn't Les Républicains, it wasn't the centre-right that kept the the National Rally out of power. It was Macron's people and the extreme left. They agreed in about 80 constituencies not to put up candidates against each other, and thereby to unite the anti-National Rally vote. And that's what took away what would otherwise indeed have been, as you rightly say, Basil, an absolute majority. If France had the same electoral system as Britain, the last election would have produced an absolute majority for the Rassemblement National, but it doesn't. And what it showed was that Macron and the left, the centre, the extreme left, so the centre and the extreme left were cooperating with each other to prevent the National Rally from winning enough seats.
La France Insoumise is itself a coalition of parties, isn't it? The old socialist
there was
party.
a coalition, but La France Insoumise is a party, but it did have other parties with it in the coalition which under which it fought the last election.
Okay, let's hear briefly from Olivier Faure, who said his camp, unsurprisingly, want to see a real left-wing government.
Let's ask that, put that point to Clovis Casali, who's there at Matignon. I mean, Clovis, there seem to be all the same demands that we heard just a couple of days ago, last time the socialists met with Sébastien Lecornu.
And the Socialist Party leaders are telling us moments ago that, in fact, they spoke to Sébastien Lecornu, but their demands, their message was really addressed to President Macron. He will have the final word. And they told Sébastien Lecornu to go and see the French president with these very clear demands, notably. And a lot of the talk was about the pension reform. They want an absolute U-turn on that pension reform. And they said, listen, some allies of Emmanuel Macron, notably the former Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne, who was the architect of this reform, saying this morning in the French press that reform should possibly be put on pause. Well, that's a sign that even within the presidential party, within the ruling centrist bloc, there are voices that agree with the Socialist Party, and that's why Emmanuel Macron needs to listen to them and also listen to the French people. That's what the Socialist Party says. Listen, President Macron needs to meet our demands because they are the demands of the French people. We want a real break. And what was interesting also in the tone of this statement we just heard from the Socialist Party is that they don't want a government with the centrist bloc. They want a real left-wing government, or at least a government that will implement their manifesto. That's a more fair, more social, with more justice, a very different budget. That's what they want. They want a complete U-turn on the pension reform. We said, problem is, that's a flagship reform of Emmanuel Macron. And if there is that...
It's kind of neoliberalism versus the rest in France, isn't it? I said at the top of the programme, France enjoys arguably the highest living standards in the world, but has perhaps been outspending itself. And now with this commitment to additional defence spending, something's got to give.
You bet. I mean, that last report confirms what I said in my earlier answer to you, which is that the left is now champing at the bit and think they can get control. But let's just think this through. Were there to be a government now, a left-wing government with support of the centrists, on the basis of abandoning about the only thing that Macron has done in the last 7 or 8 years, namely reform the pension system and allow people, which previously enabled people to retire very, very young, at in their early 60s. If that were abandoned and instead a left-wing government were to be installed, then first of all, there would be no coherence left to the Macron presidency, because I repeat, the only thing he's got to his name is this very difficult and no doubt inadequate reform of the pension system, which is much too generous. But also, I mean, goodness me, the sound of the euro being flushed down the toilet will be absolutely deafening, because where is the money going to come from to abandon this pension reform? France is already swimming in debt. And what makes this whole crisis so intractable is that you said in your question, was it neoliberalism against the left? Not really, because Marine Le Pen's party is left-wing on economics, is very strongly left-wing. She wants to put up taxes as well. So the constituency for people trying to cut public spending in order to bring the state finances under control is vanishingly small. And under those circumstances, given the terrible economic situation in the rest of Europe, I've just been looking at economic production figures in Germany, which are also going down the toilet. I mean, that really would, I think, I don't know about the death knell, but I mean, my God, if a country after 1 year still can't bring its finances under control and then decides to spend even more money and borrow even more money to meet the overspend, God knows what will happen.
It's interesting you say that the National Rally, the Le Pen party, are always referenced in UK media with the epithet far right. You can't actually say the name without saying that. Actually espouse left-wing economic policies. They've got more than that in common with La France Insoumise. So both are extremely skeptical about continuing the war in Ukraine. And I think both are opposed to the increases in defense spending. Am I wrong, John?
No, that's correct. I think on balance, they would be against that. I mean, I can't say that Marine Le Pen has been particularly anti-Ukrainian or pro-Russian, but yes, she would definitely be opposed to any kind of troops, for instance, and no doubt to extra spending. But again, yes, she has a left-wing policy. That's because her electorate is overwhelmingly rural, working class, provincial, and so on. But there's no possibility. What again makes this thing intractable is that, of course, there's no possibility at all of any kind of agreement between the National Rally and France Unbowed, La France Insoumise. They hate each other so much that although they have in some ways similar policies, they would never agree to govern together.
I mean, that is extraordinary when you think about it. That they're both also, you know, in a way represent different aspects of French culture, the French character, the French nation, if you like, in a way that the internationalist centrists don't.
That's right. They both, well, particularly.
Sorry, I should say globalist centrists, but
yes,
important distinction between internationalists and globalists. Yeah.
That's a very good point. And indeed, both, well, Mélenchon particularly is very French. I mean, Marine Le Pen is very French as well, but they are both, the two leaders are in their own ways. And certainly, yes, the two electorates are very French. The left, the La France Insoumise, obviously embodying the well-known revolutionary hard left, you know, semi-anarchist and certainly rebellious tradition, and the National Rally embodying more small businesses, farmers, you know, people who feel left behind, people from modest backgrounds, and so on. But as I say, the leader of the National Rally, Jordan Bardella, has talked about reducing state spending, claiming that he can cut 40 billion off the budget of the various social handouts to immigrants and illegals and all the rest of it. So he has been talking about that, you know. But on the other hand, Marine Le Pen has talked about raising taxes. So you know, there's no clear, or at least, of course, there are voices saying that the whole state has to be slimmed down and so on. But that's a pretty minority view.
The French do love their standard of living, don't they, John? So
yeah,
you're never going to win any votes. So, go on.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just like the debt cost in Britain is even higher than in France. It's 110 billion a year in Britain, the interest rate payments, and in France about 50 billion or 60 billion. So both sums are absolutely colossal for borrowing money, 60 billion or 110 billion a year. But as I say, in Britain it's even worse. So Britain, we're not really ones to laugh at what's happening in France, because our own finances in Britain are absolutely catastrophic as well.
Of course, in continental Europe, there you're a little bit closer to the Eastern Front, as we have to call it these days. Merz is saying that he wants to build up Germany's army and make it the biggest in Europe. Traditionally, that would have always alarmed the French, less so these days, of course, but it should alarm all of us, particularly with the imminent delivery of the Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, even though they don't know how to fire them. I'm just going to very briefly play a clip now of Douglas McGregor pointing out that should the Ukrainians get to fire these things in the general direction
if a Tomahawk missile lands in the outskirts of Moscow or Ryazan or Kazan or any of these places, he's going to be at war with Russia. And that war could rapidly escalate to the nuclear level. And once you hit the nuclear level, you have almost no control. We know that from experience in multiple war games. And
well, they certainly do. Do you think Douglas McGregor is being alarmist there? Is there an awareness in France of the precariousness of the situation, and that this is the gravest day, should we say, since the end of the Second World War?
No, there's no awareness at all. On the contrary, European leaders are even more reckless than American leaders. Merz, Macron, Starmer, and the Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof, all of them have a language of escalation. It's true that the Tomahawk issue came from the States, that came from Keith Kellogg, but if these Tomahawks are delivered, which, by the way, I doubt that they will be, Scott Ritter was on Judge Napolitano, won't be delivered until for another 2 or 3 years. And in any case, they would go via a third country. They would go via a NATO country. As it happens, he was talking about it being the Netherlands that would buy them from the Americans and then give them to the Ukrainians. But leaving aside the logistics, although we can't leave aside the logistics because Douglas McGregor's point is quite right, what I find absolutely incredible, I mean, literally incredible, there was some British military expert on British television yesterday explaining that these Tomahawk missiles could in fact be launched at Russia and directed by, for example, he said, British operators, and that would mean that there wouldn't actually be American military personnel operating them in Ukraine. But you just think, what is this man smoking? What are these people on? All you need to do is to perform a simple thought experiment. How would we feel in Britain or in France or in America if a Russian missile was on its way to London or to anywhere else in the United Kingdom? What would we think if Russia launched a large missile at one of our countries? Would we not retaliate? Would we not regard that as an act of war? And if we would, as I'm sure we would, what do these people think the Russians are going to do if a Tomahawk missile lands on their territory? Of course they're going to retaliate. And they have very powerful missiles, both in the nuclear and non-nuclear domain. But of course it's true that if, let's imagine that a Tomahawk was fired at Moscow or wherever, and then the Russians responded, of course it's very obvious that there could easily be a nuclear escalation. It so happens that the Russians have these hypersonic missiles, which the West does not have. So I don't think that the West would come out of a shooting war very well if it remained conventional, because the Russians have much better missiles. But you know, do these people not contemplate when they make these kinds of statements about how these missiles could be guided? Do they not contemplate what the reaction would be? It really is terrifying. It really is incredible.
Well, we've seen over the last 10 years, haven't we, really sort of the disintegration of diplomacy and a marked deterioration in the quality of thinking of so-called strategic analysts, which you rightly point out. You know, 2 or 3 decades ago, this kind of conversation, this whole frame of reference would have been unthinkable because everybody knew it was mutually assured destruction. What's happened? How come we're now in an idiocracy, John?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And this is often said that even during the Cold War, when there was, of course, a very strong, very deep ideological confrontation between the Soviet Union and the West. The Soviet Union was the home and the bearer of communism, around the world, I mean. Now, of course, that's not true anymore. There's no ideological confrontation, if you like, between Russia and the West. And yet we have moved, indeed, as you say, Basil, in your question, from a situation in which even then we were talking to them, we were talking to each other, even during the big crises. The Cuban Missile Crisis is a well-known example of this. And now diplomacy and contact with Russia has been demonized. When Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, went to Moscow this time last year, or rather in July last year, July 2024, he was absolutely vilified by the Europeans for even talking to Putin. When Trump did it, when Trump picked up the phone, they couldn't really be as rude as they wanted to be to him, because they're incredibly servile, of course, to Trump. Instead, they twisted words to mean what they didn't mean and claimed that everyone was in favor of peace. But the prospects of an agreement now having receded, largely thanks to them, they're now back on the war footing. And indeed, it's absolutely incredible to me that these people never seem to think about what the Russian reaction would be. I mean, good God, there was the American general, commander of the forces in Europe, General Donahue, recently saying on television, or at least saying and being filmed, that that NATO is planning to attack Kaliningrad, the enclave between Poland and Lithuania. I mean, again, do these people think the Russians are just going to let them come in? Do they not think they're going to fight back? And if they're going to fight back, what have we got on our side, if indeed it is our side, to defend ourselves against retaliation or defense? We don't have anything.
No, there was talk as well of invading, is it the Latvian estuary or something, that up there in the Baltic, there's NATO troop movements now that Sweden has joined NATO. That went through on the nod without a referendum. All the escalation, if you ask me, has been coming from our side, as well as all the bellicose rhetoric, John.
Yeah, and it is indeed coming from the Baltic. I've often coined the phrase the Balticization of Europe. We used to talk about the Balkanization of Europe in the 19th century and during the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s. But this is the Balticization. So you have these countries like Finland, Sweden, and of course the 3 Baltic states, plus obviously Poland, and to a large extent Germany, which after all is a Baltic country as well, and Denmark. All of them now are, and of course Norway traditionally, Norway perhaps slightly less vociferous than the others, but that is indeed where the conflict is being driven from. The Balts have a massively disproportionate role in Europe and within the European Union. The European Commissioner for Defence is Lithuanian. The foreign minister of the European Union
that
is Estonian,
dreadful,
and so
callous woman. I mean, how did that how on earth did she get that job, John? I mean, it's
well, partly by nepotism, because her father was a European commissioner and also an Estonian prime minister. So she then also succeeded her father in that. She's now succeeded her father in 2 capacities. Well, she got there because she was put there by Ursula von der Leyen, who back in 2019, when she took power, Ursula von der Leyen announced that she wanted her commission to be a geopolitical commission. And this was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And everybody understood then that that meant basically being hostile to Russia. You mentioned in a couple of questions ago, Basil, you said Merz wants to make the German army the biggest army in Europe. That was Ursula von der Leyen's goal when she was still German defense minister, going back 10 years now. So this has been a long-standing German plan, and which they, of course, intend to carry out with the help of their Baltic allies. It's as simple as that. That's why Kaja Kallas was put there, because it corresponds to Ursula von der Leyen's vision of Europe under her presidency.
Well, she's under threat herself. The sooner we see the back of that concrete-haired imbecile, the better. Dr. John Laughland, thank you so much for joining me. Fascinating conversation, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. We could have carried on all afternoon. Good.
Okay.
There he goes. That's Dr. John Laughland. I'm Basil Valentine. I will be back at the same time tomorrow for another breakdown of world events. I do hope you've enjoyed it. We take a unique view here on Unprecedented TV. If you want, you can buy me a coffee so we can stay on there. Details down here, down there. See you all very soon. Hello, I'm Basil Valentine, and this is Unprecedented TV, unfiltered, uncensored, unprecedented, the home of free speech here on the internet. Do please like and subscribe over at YouTube. Follow us on X, and remember, I'm on air every day, Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. for Ascending Order, your daily news edit, with live guests and all the genuinely most important stories from around the world. Don't allow yourself to be propagandized by the corporate media. Forget the world at one on Radio 4. Join me, Basil Valentine, instead, 1 p.m. on X, Monday to Friday, also on YouTube. And I'll see you all very soon.